Okay, Brill. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Again, apologies for the slight delay, but we're going to launch straight into it and hopefully make up some time so we can address some of your questions with answers at the end of the session. Today, we're going to be focusing on leadership for sustainability, and I'm hoping to give you some practical strategies for risk and safety management and the ways in which they cross over with environmental management and the bigger picture of sustainability. My name is Tama Carroll. I'm a senior environmental consultant and trainer. I'm the founder of Envelo Limited and the co-founder of iCore Systems. And I specialize in environmental legislation and health and safety legislation because apparently I'm one of the few people on this planet who find that marginally fun, entertaining. And I really enjoy the challenge of getting stuck in and figuring out what it all means, and more importantly, what businesses are supposed to be doing about environmental compliance. Envelo Limited, my original business, was founded in 2015 and is a consultancy and training business that specializes in helping UK businesses to integrate the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals into their key sustainability strategies. And the way I do this is through a number of recognized international frameworks like ISO 14001 or ISO 50001 for energy, as well as some of the larger frameworks like ESG or B Corp or that kind of strategic environmental risk management. The delivery of those management systems is underpinned by legislation and compliance, and businesses needing to, at a bare minimum, not break the law, as well as auditing and training to continuously check, monitor, improve management systems and processes. And the training and mentoring is designed to help businesses feel that they can proactively address some of the challenges that they will inevitably be facing as a result of global megatrends and sustainability issues. My second business, iCore Systems, is a cloud-based solution that we set up 4 years ago now. And this was specifically to help businesses do the bare minimum of not breaking the law. And it's not that businesses would ever do that intentionally, it's just that legislation's quite complicated, it's constantly evolving, and it's very difficult to interpret and apply. So our system helps with that, as is required by some of those international frameworks. All this serves to demonstrate really that this is my day job. So I work with organizations to help them understand environmental challenges and bigger sustainability issues, and then bring that down to an organizational level to determine what businesses can realistically do about it and how they can progress their sustainability performance. The way I like to always start my sessions is with a bit of an overview of these global environmental challenges in a little section I like to call Sustainability 101. And this is essentially what's happening in the world and what do we need to be paying attention to. Now, I'm sure you're all aware, climate change is one of the biggest environmental sustainability issues that we are facing in modern times. And this is a result of greenhouse gas emissions causing the planet to warm, which is resulting in climate change, more extreme, more severe weather events that is affecting every single one of us in some way, shape, or form, and is therefore a cornerstone of what businesses are considering in terms of risk and resilience. How do we continue to do business as normal when supply chains are being disrupted, materials and resources are being disrupted, and the challenges that the world are facing are kind of changing consumer values and expectations. So it's quite a complicated landscape. There are two things that we absolutely know. We know that we have caused this current period of global warming through industrial activity, and therefore we also know that the solution is through businesses and organizational processes to try and minimize and kind of bring back to a stable environment and a stable climate that poses less risk to all of us. Now, when we talk about the science or the history of climate change, there are some key numbers that are absolutely critical. The first is 1.5 degrees, and you will hear this spoken about in terms of climate science. 1.5 degrees is the amount of global warming that has occurred to date. And although at a global level, 1.5 degrees might not seem that significant, The best example I always give is to think of the human body. A human body operates perfectly at 37 degrees centigrade because what keeps us alive is a sequence of biological, physical, and chemical processes that are very temperature dependent. And the same is true for this planet. It is biology, physics, and chemistry that is temperature dependent that gives us everything we need to be alive. So from the perfect temperature in a human body, 37 degrees centigrade, if we were to get ill and our temperature were to rise by 1.5 degrees, we would actually probably be bedridden, very, very unwell. And if it were to go much higher than that, there is a genuine risk of death because it throws off all of those underlying principles. So what we know is that 1.5 degrees at a global level, although it seems like a small number, is actually very significant. Which leads us on to our next number, 2 degrees centigrade. And this is the line in the sand, the global warming that we are trying to stay below, because beyond 2 degrees centigrade, things start to get very sick. When you're talking about sustainability and climate science, you will probably hear these numbers touted around quite a lot. But for businesses, the question is, well, how do we affect this kind of degree rise, this temperature change? And that brings us to our last number, 450 parts per million. Now, what that is a concentration of greenhouse gases in the environment that we need to not exceed if we want to stay below the 2 degrees centigrade threshold. So 2 degrees centigrade threshold is achieved if we do not allow the concentration of greenhouse gas emissions in the environment to exceed 450 parts per million. Now, the problem is we are eking ever close to that threshold. So in Hawaii, there is an observatory, the Mauna Loa Observatory, that monitors global greenhouse gas emissions in daily time, in real time, and they publish a monthly report as to where we are standing. And what we can see with the last data set that came through, August 2025, we're sitting currently at a global concentration of about 425 parts per million, very close to that 450 threshold. And it's this data that is driving net zero and carbon reduction and trying to get us all to quantify our impact in terms of a carbon number so we can affect this concentration and then hopefully affect global warming and keep it below that 2 degrees centigrade rise. Now, this really matters because what we know is that climate change is presenting multifaceted risks to all of us. We are seeing increased storms and extreme weather events. We're seeing shifting weather patterns, which affect the resources that we depend on, the supply chains that are able to supply them, the things we're used to having available for us are being affected. And this is not just luxuries and nice to haves. I'm talking food, medicines, critical supplies. We're also seeing a spread of range of infectious diseases. And ultimately, all of this is pushing pressure on human societies. What we also know is because of those biological, physical, and chemical processes that exist naturally on this planet, that is why we are able to not only survive, but to thrive. So when we think about all the things that this planet does naturally to support us, to keep us alive, to help us build the businesses that we're building, we're actually talking about ecosystem services. And those ecosystem services, those natural, biological, physical, and chemical processes are the benefits provided by ecosystems that contribute to making human life both possible and worth living. And some of those are invisible, and the connections between all of them can be really complicated, which is why we are focusing on this temperature rise in a way to try and protect them. We also know that there is a direct link between pollution and changing climates and human health and well-being. The World Health Organization, for example, estimates that 1 in 8 of all global deaths are as a direct result of air pollution. So if we were to flip that around, that means 1 in 8 of all global deaths could be prevented if we prevented global air pollution. So we know that the lines to human health and well-being are incredibly direct. We're also seeing more real world consequences of the pollution that we're creating. So it's not just greenhouse gases into the atmosphere that are invisible. There is physical plastic waste and various other materials that are now starting to saturate the environment. It's kind of pushed beyond the planet's natural ability to absorb these materials. And now we're starting to see a buildup of wastes and pollutions that, again, are affecting our ecosystems. They're getting in the way of how these processes are supposed to occur. And of course, it's not just about us, it's about future generations and the worlds that we plan to leave for them to make sure that they can continue to survive and to thrive with all of those ecosystem services being protected. So it's quite a bleak story. And what we also know is that these things directly correlate to business risk and resilience. So this is a little graphic that I've been using in my business for over 10 years. And at the time that it was published in 2012, it was a future prediction of the point where environmental issues were going to become critically important to business operations. So they predicted 2015 was going to be the year of carbon emissions. And looking back at it now, we know that 2015 was the year that the Paris Agreement was signed that made a global commitment to keep global warming below that 2-degree centigrade rise. 2019, 2020, we saw critical issues around water, grid energy, waste, and gas, and a lot of legislation arose at the time, banning plastics, single-use plastics. David Attenborough showed us all that our oceans were severely polluted, and there was a big societal change that coincided with COVID. And here we are, 2022 to 2025, where other natural resources and rare earth metals are becoming critically important. And we can see that in this journey towards electrification. So what this means is that businesses who want to continue to operate as normal need to usually forward look at what these environmental challenges are going to be, and then consider the opportunities for risk and resilience in addressing them specifically with a long-term and proactive perspective of their operational activity. Because it all ultimately falls into resilience. We as organizations have a job to do. We cannot afford any kind of downtime, and everything that is critically important to our resilience is fundamentally founded within one or more environmental or sustainability issues that we know we are facing at this point in time. Now, usually this is where I leave my audience a little bit depressed, and I am sorry about that. I promise never to sugarcoat the truth. The situation out there is not good at the moment. But I am an optimist and I work proactively in this area. And I do believe that all of these challenges, as overwhelming as they might seem, provide an opportunity to do better. And the more we understand about all of these challenges and how they're connected to each other and how they intercorrelate with each other, will give us more insight to make better strategic decisions to transform the world to sustainability as individuals, as organizations, and as countries. It's kind of a double-edged knife. When you've got so many problems to deal with, you essentially can't go wrong. Just pick a direction, pick a problem, and see what progress you can make on it. And there will always be those opportunities for sustainability and for better environmental management. So now we need a framework. If we know that these are all of the problems that we're facing, how do we move past them? How do we consider the complexity of all of these issues in our strategic objectives and our organizational strategy? And that's where I believe the Sustainable Development Goals come in. So the first thing to understand, and you might have heard these terms used before, we talk about sustainable development and we talk about sustainability. I think it's really important to clarify that sustainable development is the journey and sustainability is the destination. And when we talk about the destination, we tend to talk about it as a triple bottom line between people, planet, and profit. And it is this point in time where there is equity and equality between people, planet, and profit. When I started university, it was described to me as a three-legged stool. So if you imagine three legs on a stool, people, planet, profit, if each of those legs is equal and equally weighted, you have a perfectly functional stool. And that's the destination. That's what we want, is it's going to do what it's supposed to do. It's going to stand up and it's going to take weight. But if one of those legs is too short or one of those legs is too long, then the stool is unsustainable. It's going to fall over. So the destination is equality and equity between people, planet, and profit. But the journey towards that is sustainable development. And sustainable development is about meeting people's needs now and in the future, whilst getting back within environmental limits. Because I think if we're all honest, we can admit that the three-legged stool is not equally balanced. So what this means is that we need to start seeing significant improvements in environmental and social performance, whilst also staying economically viable. And that leads us on to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Essentially, 17 of the world's biggest problems that need to be solved, that need to be addressed in order to hit that point of sustainability, of triple bottom line sustainability. And the advantage of the Sustainable Development Goals, which were a global agreement again, established in 2015, is it provides a very clear roadmap of where individuals, organizations, and governments can focus their time and attention to solve 17 of the world's biggest problems, although not all at the same time, but knowing that as they're doing so, it's aligning with a global effort, and it is founded in global science and data and knowledge and technology and information and all the things that are going to drive forward this transformative change. Now, under the 17 high-level goals, there are 169 specific targets that are associated with the goals, which allow organizations to really drill down into specific areas for action. Now, the truth is, they're not all for everybody. Out of 169 targets, some are written for individuals, some are written for businesses, and some are written for governments. So the first step of the process is to drill down and figure out what is relevant to you. What can you realistically do something about or do something with? And when you think you can realistically affect something, then you can think about the levels of intervention. Is it strategic? Is it operational? Is it through your staff engagement and workforce, volunteering, or is it through partnerships? And you can support each of those at the levels that are appropriate to the nature, scale, and activities of your business operations. So 17 high-level goals, 169 targets, the roadmap through sustainable development towards sustainability. And the reason we're such a big fan of the goals is because it's international science, it's international progress, it's quantifiable, and it is transparent. And business is a vital partner in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals because companies can contribute through their core activities as long as they assess their impact, they set ambitious goals, and they communicate transparently about the results. Now, the SDGs, 17 written out, they're not hierarchical, so there's no, one is not more important than number 17. As with everything in sustainability and environmental management, they are very much interconnected and interrelated. But ultimately, they take a triple bottom line perspective where we seek to protect our environment, we seek to enhance society, and we seek to build a strong and just economy in which businesses can operate and thrive whilst still protecting society and the environment through their operations. And this triple bottom line theme is inherent when we think about some of the bigger frameworks that exist. So environmental, social, and corporate governance, ESG, again, takes this triple bottom line perspective. It is people, planet, and profit, trying to find that equity and equality where everybody can win in the end, and we can strive towards sustainability. Now, what I wanted to point out in this session was I work a lot with frameworks, and they go by a number of different names. We can call it sustainability reporting or sustainability management, environmental management, corporate social responsibility, impact reporting, ESG, social value. To be honest, the names change quite a lot, but what this slide shows you is that actually the governing principles for whatever we call it are all fundamentally the same, and they are all bounded by the Sustainable Development Goals. So every single one of these frameworks is going to be asking organizations to encompass the challenges and the roadmaps that are defined by the Sustainable Development Goals. The other kind of key governing principle is United Nations Global Compact, Principles for Responsible Investment in the World Economic Forum. And this is where we begin to touch on those leadership requirements, those principles for leadership that need to be embedded in organizational strategy. So fundamentally, businesses have a responsibility, a leadership responsibility, to protect human rights and not be complicit in human rights abuses. They should be protecting their workforce and making sure that their workers are safe and legal and protected in their employment without discrimination. They should be seeking to protect the environment, taking a precautionary approach to challenges, which again is that proactive and forward-thinking perspective of the challenges, as well as being ultimately more environmentally responsible. Businesses should be just and not corrupt, and should be making financial decisions in consideration of human, environment, and labor standards. And these 10 principles underpin every single framework that exists for sustainability, for risk and resilience, and for business continuity in the modern world. So what does that mean in practice for our sustainability leaders? Well, I thought this was quite interesting. This is the Cambridge Sustainability Leadership Model. So this has actually been very well researched in terms of what are the skills, what are the behaviors, what are the attitudes that we would expect to see from those who are leading the charge towards sustainability. It's really worth having a look at if this interests you in any way, shape, or form. But it is that leadership action to set up the right targets and measures aligned with global science, to make sure that incentives within an organization support better outcomes, to drive socially useful innovation, to ensure capital that acts for the long term. So again, this idea of long-term thinking, to value the true costs of business activities. And that includes the things that we can't necessarily quantify, like the impacts on people and the environment, especially when we take into consideration supply chain complexity, to align organizational purpose, strategy, and business models, to use evidence-based targets, to embed operational practices and decisions, and to engage and collaborate and advocate for change towards sustainability. So it's these kind of leadership skills, these leadership behaviors that come at a very corporate, financial, like governance level within organizations that will ultimately support our economy to support better environmental and social performance from organizations. What that looks like in practice is really understanding the context of your organization. That sustainability 101 section that I started this session with is just a high level summarization of some of the world's challenges that we are facing. And the context is then further driven into detail through the Sustainable Development Goals, where we can then begin to recognize interdependence, complexity, interconnectedness, and those kind of like mega trends around resources and, what we need to do businesses. There is this requirement for conscientiousness, consciousness, and that is an attitude and an open-mindedness to thinking outside the box and thinking beyond our own organization. So again, no business exists in isolation. We are all dependent and interdependent on all of our stakeholders to do what we do as organizations. Obviously, we're thinking about continuity. We want to continue to do business. We want to continue to do good business that enhances and protects people and the planet. And ultimately, that means we need to consider the connectedness of all of those systems. We need to think about the needs of all of our stakeholders, both now and in the future, and think of it in terms of trust and fairness and needs instead of wants, which is one of the bigger challenges that we're facing today. There is, of course, opportunities for creativity and innovation. Again, I say to some of my clients, if you consider the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, potential roadmap to new industries, new sectors that aim to solve some of these problems, we can see that opportunity for innovative businesses coming to existence or organizations pivoting to address some of that challenge through innovation. And ultimately to consider again that we are all parts of a whole. So embedding sustainability into our business structures will ultimately make us all more sustainable. Taking some of these high-level themes, it is then about bringing it into your own business. So kind of the strategic leadership journey goes from understanding all of these global sustainability challenges, the context of the organization, where in the world do we sit, what do we do, how do we affect the planet, people and planet and profit, and how do those things affect us? And kind of a good understanding of all of those challenges and also understanding that they might change helps us to begin to pinpoint a direction. The next requirement is obviously to think about the needs and expectations of our interested parties or our stakeholders. So fundamentally, who wants what from us as an organization? What are our investors looking at? What are our senior management team looking at? What are our employees interested in? What do our customers want? What do the regulators want? What does social media want from us as a business? And how do we consider all those needs and expectations as we continue with the strategic direction of the organization? Again, as organizations, if we fail to deliver to our stakeholders, we are unlikely to be sustainable. So understanding the context and the needs and expectations of interested parties then puts us into a position where we can consider those global and organizational risks and opportunities. And that then feeds into risk resilience, continuity, and ultimately continual improvement through a strategic sustainability action plan. Fundamentally, what all of this research is going to do is help us identify those risks, threats, and opportunities. Now, these are words we use quite often, but in this context, they're quite specific. So we talk about a risk as uncertainty of the outcome. It's not knowing. It's saying we didn't anticipate this challenge was going to become realistic for us in the future until it is realistic. And I think the truth is that happened to a lot of businesses during COVID, because at no point did any of us actually think that the world could be shut down until it was shut down. Those businesses that asked the question, what if there was a global pandemic and people couldn't come into work, were in a much better resilience position to be able to get back up to business as usual when it did happen. So the risk is not asking the question. When you ask the question, the answer might be negative, in which case we'd consider it a threat, or it might be positive, in which case we'd consider it an opportunity. And our strategic decision making should ultimately seek to minimize the threats, minimize the negatives, and maximize the positives, maximize the opportunities. But in order to know what those are, we need to think about the bigger picture, the context of the organization, and the needs and expectations of interested parties. Now, whilst that's very high level consideration, this again puts a lot of responsibility on leadership. It is required, it is the responsibility that you recognize and analyze the business context for those risks and opportunities, that you integrate health, safety, environment, and quality aspects into your core business strategy, that you make policy commitments to health, safety, environment, and quality, but that everything you commit to is provable. Top management obviously have to walk the walk, and people are much more discerning, in terms of behaviors not matching values. And ultimately, this is all underpinned by effective communication, which will then seek to manage risk and adaptability, enhance efficiencies and profitable flexibility, and also create better resilience and communication and relationships within our products and supply chains. In practice, it's how you embed a management system into your business. That strategic leadership requires that high-level thinking of all the things we do and all the ways we interact with the planet, and then we can drill down into this is what it means for our daily operations. And whilst no business can single-handedly save the planet, all progress is valuable. We have to remember that we are all parts of a whole. So one improvement here multiplied by other organizations also achieving that one improvement will ultimately have a global benefit, and we will see the advantage. So please don't be disheartened if you think you're not going to be able to solve one on your own. None of us can, but we should all be walking the same walk and singing to the same hymn sheet. Now, when you think about sustainability and improvement opportunities, the one thing I really wanted to say here is that anything you do should be smart. So again, it's why I encourage aligning with the SDGs, which sit at the heart of every single sustainability framework. It says when you make a commitment towards sustainability, towards better environmental management or better people management, you need to be very specific about what you're going to do. You have to be able to measure it. You have to have a detailed action plan. So, it's not good enough to just say, this is what we're going to do. The how is important. It needs to be realistic and it needs to be time bound. We need to see things being achieved so that we can move on to the next project or program or sustainability initiative. And the reason this matters a lot in modern times is because of the risk of greenwashing and also a greater awareness of greenwashing. Now, you may or may not have heard this term before. It's relatively new, the last couple of years, but essentially greenwashing refers to the act of misleading consumers regarding the environmental practices of a company or the environmental benefits of a product or service. And I've put there that this is whether intentionally or unintentionally. So my personal opinion is that there are not very many businesses out there that are intentionally trying to pull the wool over our eyes. But what I do see is a lot of good intentioned businesses making commitments that they cannot validate, that cannot be proven. And there are certain words that you will see knocking about the environmental or sustainability sphere that are not regulated and don't actually mean anything. So things like earth-friendly or natural are not standardized. They don't really mean anything. And so an organization saying that they are earth-friendly without being able to prove how or why they are earth-friendly would be greenwashing, whether they intended to or not. The last thing I want to show you, though, is that there is a counter to this, and it all goes back to what I've mentioned in terms of why aligning with international standards is so important. In the UK, we have now seen environmental communication or environmental claims being encompassed into consumer protection law. We actually have always known that when you market materials, you can't claim something that isn't true. But for some reason, that never really implied to environmental criteria. Now we've got it written into frameworks, principles, and soon to be legislation that any business talking about their environmental or sustainability performance must be making claims that are truthful and accurate, must be clear and unambiguous. So I'd argue earth friendly, it's a little bit ambiguous, must not omit or hide important relevant information. We see this a lot with organizations that are, for example, very energy intensive or very resource intensive. And they say things like, we're sustainable because we planted a forest. Now, that's not to say that your forest isn't brilliant. It is. Plant as many trees as you like, but your forest doesn't make up for you not looking at your manufacturing processes. You're kind of skating around the real thing and saying, look over here at this shiny thing because it looks better. When you're comparing environmental performance, it must be fair and meaningful. You must consider the full life cycle of products and services, and every claim must be substantiated. So it comes back again to whatever you claim you're doing needs to be provable. And that is why aligning with programs like the Sustainable Development Goals or any of the international frameworks will give you a lot more confidence that you're doing the right thing or saying the right thing and that you can prove what it is that you're doing, and will also protect you from the potential backlash of making an unintentional green claim and therefore being accused of greenwashing potentially. So bringing it back to the ESGs, the risk of greenwashing dramatically reduces if you align with current science, best practice, and standardized KPIs. Remember, 17 goals with 169 targets, and all of the KPIs are defined for you. And ultimately, the SDGs are triple bottom line. It's about people, planet, profit, or environment, social, and governance, and it ultimately provides a roadmap to responsible leadership towards sustainability, responsible development towards sustainability. And let's not forget, there are some big world problems that need to be solved, but we have a very real opportunity to transform the world to sustainability as individuals, as organizations, and as countries through good leadership and good science. We've managed, despite the slight delay in starting, to get this done in time. So thank you very much, if you're still with me, for your time and attention. I hope you found that useful. And what we will do now is open up to any questions. Susan, are you able to chair on questions for me, please?
Yes, of course. If you have any questions, please you can enter on the Q&A or the chat box, which is at the side of your screen or at the bottom of the screen, depending on what you're using. We'll just wait for a few minutes until hopefully get some questions.
Otherwise, we've managed maximum efficiency. Got one in the...
Yeah, there's one question. Yes, there will be not to download, but it will be for you to view it on the resource hub on your MyRSM.
Yeah, so there's a full recording of the session, which obviously have the slides and all the words over. Please do share far and wide.
Yes. Yeah, there's one question from Joanne. If you are currently measuring your carbon footprint, what happens when you identify another source of data that dramatically increases the impact? And how can you deal with this?
Okay, so carbon footprinting is a little bit complicated, but considering that what we are all crying for is better data, the scenario that you're outlining is not uncommon, and a lot of businesses are definitely being faced with this. You know, we had this data, we've been measuring for years, and now we've got a new data set because either science has improved and it is something we can measure, or businesses are actually getting better at sharing this information. The frameworks say that when something significant changes, so that could be new operations, new data sets, new kind of elements being pulled into the different scopes, what you should do as a starting point is reset your baseline. So it's a change, something's very different, which means you don't compare to 10 years ago when that data set didn't exist. You essentially make a new baseline. Now that we've got all of this information, this is our new line in the sand, and this will be the point that we now compare future improvement to as we go forward. Now, that might make your whole footprint bigger. In fact, it probably will make your whole footprint bigger, but that is why it's really important to align with the international standards in terms of normalizing the data. So it might be bigger, but if you are still efficient and you compare your carbon footprint to turnover, for example, your number of staff, you should still see those efficiencies in that reduction. Or you might not in the first year, and that wouldn't be great for you, obviously, as a business, because that's not really what we want. But actually, in terms of data integrity, it is great. And I think it would be perfectly acceptable to write your carbon report and say, do you know what? It doesn't look good right now, but the reason is we got better at data and we're bringing more into it and we're trying to be more comprehensive and more holistic. And when we've pulled all of that in, we're going to set our baseline again, and then we'll measure progress from that point. I think it's one of those challenges that we're definitely all facing with.
Thank you. There's one more question. From a compliance perspective, is there any system in place to ensure organization works towards sustainability and sustainable development other than ISO? To my knowledge, ISO is voluntary for organizations.
All of the frameworks are voluntary for the most part, unless you work in very specific sectors like finance or healthcare, in which case, or you're on the London Stock Exchange, in which case those ESG frameworks are very much not voluntary. You have to do it. I think it's why I like the law so much. So in the UK, we actually have, one of the best, and I'm not saying it's perfect, like everything's complicated, no system is perfect. But we have one of the most comprehensive kind of legal systems for the protection of the environment, and that is true for Europe as well. And what I like about the law is that it's not voluntary. So at a bare minimum, laws exist to protect the environment and to protect people from business activities or from anything that can harm them. And if every business was absolutely confident that they were doing everything that the law said that they should be doing, and they can prove it, then it would create a much more level playing field. It's just that businesses tend not to communicate about this, when things are going well or when perhaps they're not going particularly well. I think with the ISO frameworks and, B Corp, ESG, like I said, they're all fundamentally the same. They all ask you to go through the same process in some way, shape, or form. Whilst they are voluntary, what I do know that in, kind of supply chains or businesses, they're actually not, because what they do give is confidence. If a business has an ISO accreditation, what that means is everybody else knows what that means. And so for a lot of, procurement processes or tenders or PQQs, even though it is voluntary, if you don't have some accredited system, it does tend to make organizations less competitive. So although not mandatory from law, I think businesses driving it and saying it's a bit above voluntary though, like, not so much a nice to have, but really need to have nowadays. the only other program is the Sustainable Development Goals themselves. So that's not really, it's a framework. You can work alongside it. You can subscribe to it. It can be audited and it can be verified. But any one of us can pick up the SDGs and figure out, dig through them, figure out how they apply to our business and what opportunities there might be. And that would be, kind of an opportunity as well. From compliance, we love law. It's very good questions. Thank you. Are there any more for us here?
There's one more from Joanne again. Many OSH professionals find sustainability placed with their department, although they may have no experience. Can you recommend a starting point for them to gain competence within this area? Where should a new person to sustainability get started?
Absolutely. So I always think of it as kind of two knowledge perspectives. Health and safety, or OSH professionals, occupational safety and health professionals, know a lot about people's health and safety. And that is a very important part of sustainability in the bigger picture of that triple bottom line. So that's what they know. That's their knowledge base. And it is quite niche. So systems, like the ISO frameworks, if you've worked with one, again, you could probably work with anyone because systems is a knowledge base. Health and safety and people is a knowledge base. And therefore, the gap for a lot of OSH professionals is this environmental knowledge. What is the state of the world? What is climate change? What is resource depletion? And how does it all connect together? So I would say the gap to fill is to just go and get some general environmental awareness, general environmental knowledge. There are a lot of free online courses that you can do, that will just kind of touch the basics of climate science and environmental science. There's lots of blogs and resources and, these types of webinars that are available. And also various other kind of networks where environmental people hang out. So perhaps those opportunities for knowledge sharing with other professionals. Again, I tend to encourage, cooperation and openness and transparency. And if you don't know the answer, then go find someone who does know the answer. But I'd say the biggest challenge is not the systems. It's not the people part of the triple bottom line. It's that kind of environmental knowledge and that sustainability knowledge that is the bigger challenge. But there's lots and lots of information out there.